The scream of metal being cut ripped through the morning before the sun had fully climbed the roofs. It wasn't a mistake, or an accident, or a warning scrape. It was the sound of a lock being murdered on purpose. Maya's video call slammed into my phone a half-second later, her face already panicked before the camera even stabilized. When the image finally snapped into focus, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Standing in my driveway was HOA Karen, already mid-swing, bolt cutters raised like she was opening a safe she believed belonged to her. She was wrapped in a bathrobe, hair wild, makeup melting under exertion, breathing hard as if the effort thrilled her. Behind her, a tow truck idled with its lights on, staged and ready. The driver leaned out and whispered that the vehicle was government property. HOA Karen didn't even slow down. "Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from?" She shouted laws she didn't possess, authority she never had, and commands no sane person would issue while committing a felony in daylight. The cutters closed again, and the federal security chain snapped with a sound that felt heavier than metal. She had no idea what she'd just activated. Inside that Jeep were systems never meant to be tested by a suburban tyrant playing sheriff. Alarms didn't scream outward, they whispered inward. And the moment she touched that chain, consequences started moving toward her whether she believed in them or not. I used to think HOA presidents were just bored retirees with clipboards and too much time. HOA Karen destroyed that illusion in seconds. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was performing dominance. Before that morning, I only knew her through violation emails she fired off like warning shots, always timed to feel invasive. The first one hit my inbox 2 weeks into deployment, written like a citation but dripping with contempt. Unauthorized commercial vehicle, daily fines applied, immediate compliance required. My government-issued task force Jeep, clearly marked and legally parked, was according to her lowering community standards. That was my introduction to HOA Karen. She didn't carry authority quietly. She dragged it everywhere, loud and heavy, daring anyone to challenge the weight. She patrolled Willowbrook like she owned it, ruler in hand, measuring grass, scowling at porch decor, breathing down necks that never invited her there. Residents weren't neighbors to her. They were children she could scold without consequence. Control wasn't a tool for her. It was a need. The moment she learned I was deployed overseas, she leaned into that need hard. She cornered my sister Maya in the driveway one afternoon, breathless from crossing the lawn too fast, eyes already narrowed. "Rules are rules," she snapped, close enough that Maya could smell her perfume and sweat. "If your brother can't follow them, maybe this neighborhood isn't appropriate for your lifestyle." That sentence told me everything. She didn't hate violations. She hated military families. She also wasn't acting alone, even then. Every fabricated notice, every threat dressed up as procedure, every rule that appeared out of nowhere pointed to something bigger, something she assumed would never be exposed because she believed no one was watching closely enough. She underestimated the wrong family. When my grandmother passed and left me the house, it felt like a lifeline I couldn't afford to lose. 3 bedrooms, creaky floors, a kitchen that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and old memories. It was the last real connection I had to the woman who raised me after my parents died. I planned to rent it during deployments, save money, and keep it exactly the way she'd left it. I didn't know Willowbrook came with HOA Karen attached like a parasite. Back then, all I'd heard were whispers. She'd been president forever. She fined people for mismatched curtains. She once measured a mailbox with a tape measure and made a grown man cry. I laughed it off as suburban exaggeration. Then deployment orders hit, and reality showed up in my inbox while I was already dodging real danger. 2 weeks overseas, heat pressing in like a living thing, my phone buzzed with her email. Violation. Daily fine. Unauthorized vehicle. My federally issued Jeep, parked legally in my grandmother's driveway, was suddenly a hazard to community harmony. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maya did too, until she walked into the HOA office with my deployment orders in hand. HOA Karen sat behind the desk like she'd been waiting for the confrontation, red-faced, smirking, already leaning back as if the outcome was predetermined. Maya explained calmly that I was deployed, and the vehicle was federal property, HOA. Karen didn't even glance at the paperwork. She waved it away and said if I couldn't follow basic standards, maybe our family didn't belong there. That was the moment Maya understood this wasn't about a Jeep. Military families across Willowbrook had the same stories. Noise complaints that never happened, landscaping violations that didn't exist, threats about liens and towing delivered with smiles. Every family shared one thing. They were easy to pressure because they were already serving somewhere else. Easy to intimidate because they trusted rules to mean something. Easy to target because they weren't home to fight back. And now HOA Karen stood in my driveway, cutting into a federal chain like none of that mattered. The tow truck driver hesitated again, quieter this time, repeating that it was government property. She screamed over him, declaring herself the authority, declaring the Jeep removed, declaring reality optional. I watched from thousands of miles away, jaw tight, recognizing the moment for what it was. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was a line crossed in public, on camera, with witnesses and timestamps. Neighbors started appearing at the edges of the frame, drawn by the noise. Some froze. Some raised phones. A few veterans stepped closer, instinctively forming a barrier without being told. HOA Karen kept working the cutters, grunting, tugging at the chain like she could tear the problem out by force alone. She had no idea that the Jeep was already calling for help she could never outrun. I didn't shout. I didn't panic. I understood exactly what she'd done. She hadn't just tried to tow a vehicle. She'd triggered systems that don't care about HOA titles or suburban politics. The sound of that chain breaking wasn't the start of something. It was the end of everything she thought protected her. The Jeep wasn't there by accident, and it wasn't there to make a statement. It was there because I was gone. Deployment has a way of stripping life down to logistics, and the house my grandmother left me became part of that math. It was a place to anchor things while I was overseas, a place that didn't move while everything else did. The Jeep stayed because it had to, because it was issued, because it was locked, because it was supposed to be untouchable. HOA Karen understood absence better than most people. She knew exactly when to push, exactly who wasn't around to push back, and exactly how far she could go before anyone noticed. That house mattered more than property value or curb appeal. It was the last thing my grandmother gave me, and she gave it with the kind of quiet trust that doesn't come with instructions. Old floors that creaked the same way every night, cabinets worn smooth by decades of use, a kitchen that still held the smell of cinnamon no matter how many times it was cleaned. It wasn't a symbol to me. It was continuity. HOA Karen treated it like leverage the moment she realized no one was living there full-time. Authority, real authority, was never loud in my life. It didn't announce itself or posture. It showed up, did its job, and left. That's how I understood it long before HOA Karen ever put my address into her system. She, on the other hand, treated authority like a costume she could wear, as long as no one challenged it. She didn't know where it started or where it stopped. She only knew how it felt to use it. Her rise inside the HOA wasn't dramatic. It was attritional. She stayed longer than everyone else, sent more emails than anyone wanted to read, volunteered for committees no one else had time for, and slowly made herself unavoidable. Meetings became shorter, but more frequent. Agendas changed at the last minute. Emergency language appeared where none was needed. People stopped attending because it felt pointless, and that absence became her permission. By the time I inherited the house, HOA Karen had conditioned the neighborhood to compliance, not through rules alone, but through fatigue. She understood that most people will give up long before they fight back if resistance costs time, energy, and peace. She framed every demand as temporary, every fine as procedural, every threat as necessary. The goal wasn't enforcement. It was normalization. Maya felt it immediately. She wasn't intimidated by paperwork, but she recognized contempt when she heard it. HOA Karen never spoke to her like a neighbor. It was always downward, always dismissive, always laced with implication. Military families weren't treated like contributors to the community. They were framed as disruptions, liabilities, temporary problems that needed managing. The language mattered. Words like transient, high risk, non-standard, nothing overt enough to challenge directly, everything subtle enough to deny later. HOA Karen didn't need to say she didn't want military families there. She enforced it. Different rules, different urgency, different consequences. When Maya started digging through old HOA documents, It wasn't rebellion. It was self-defense. She wasn't looking for loopholes. She was looking for truth. What she found wasn't hidden cleverly. It was buried under indifference. Original bylaws that clearly protected government and military vehicles. Language that left no room for interpretation. HOA Karen had known. She had always known. That discovery changed the shape of everything. This wasn't overreach born from ignorance. It was fabrication born from confidence. Confidence reinforced by her husband's position, by years of no consequences, by a board too tired or too afraid to intervene. She believed immunity was permanent. I didn't feel angry when Maya told me. I felt clear. My grandmother used to say bullies count on confusion more than fear. Once confusion is gone, they don't know what to do. HOA Karen had pushed past paperwork and into personal space because she thought the system belonged to her. What she didn't understand was that authority doesn't come from repetition or volume. It comes from limits, and she had just stepped beyond all of them. By the time the lock was cut, the conflict had already been written. The Jeep was never the issue. It was the test, and HOA Karen had decided on her own to fail it in the most public way possible. Once I stopped looking at HOA Karen as a loud individual and started seeing her as the center of a system, the pattern sharpened fast. Nothing she did was spontaneous. Every action was supported by a structure designed to let her apply pressure while pretending her hands were clean. On paper, the HOA looked ordinary. President, board, committees, vendors. In practice, it functioned like a funnel, pulling authority inward and pushing responsibility outward until no one below her felt capable of resisting. Her favorite weapon was paperwork, not because it was strong, but because it was exhausting. Violation notices written in vague language that sounded official without saying anything concrete. Deadlines that shifted. Fees that appeared without explanation. Words like aesthetic cohesion and community harmony used as shields. You couldn't argue against them because they weren't real standards. They were moods written down and enforced selectively. When notices didn't work, she escalated through intermediaries, tow companies, security patrols, contractors she could later distance herself from. None of them were technically HOA employees, and that mattered to her. It gave her plausible deniability while still directing outcomes. She didn't need to threaten anyone personally. She just had to point. Surveillance was the next layer. Patrol vehicles circling at odd hours. Guards filming driveways, asking neighbors questions framed as concern. The goal wasn't evidence. It was visibility, to remind people they were being watched, measured, judged. Fear works best when it's ambient, when it never announces itself loudly enough to confront directly. The neighborhood adapted the way people always do under pressure. Conversation stopped when HOA Karen walked by. Neighbors avoided eye contact with targeted families. Invitations quietly disappeared. Silence became currency. Nobody wanted to be next, and HOA Karen understood that better than anyone. She didn't need universal obedience. She needed isolation. Maya felt the shift immediately. The warnings stopped pretending to be neutral. They became accusatory. Security guards treated her presence as suspicious. Questions about the Jeep turned into questions about me, about what I did, about what I might have brought home. Military service reframed as instability, authority reframed as threat. The vandalism of Maya's car wasn't random. It was the natural outcome of the environment HOA Karen cultivated. Tires slashed, a mirror shattered, spray paint dragged across glass in crude letters. The message wasn't subtle. Resistance would be punished, whether officially or not, and the silence afterward was louder than the damage itself. When a guard cornered Maya in a grocery store parking lot and spoke about weapons and PTSD, it wasn't concern, it was character assassination. He didn't need proof. He needed implication. HOA Karen's system thrived on suggestion. Once doubt was planted, she let it grow unchecked. What she didn't realize was that her obsession had flipped the power dynamic. The Jeep's internal cameras recorded everything. Every late-night trespass, every flashlight beam, every attempt to peer inside. 17 times in 3 days. Numbers matter. Patterns matter. Obsession leaves trails. HOA Karen wasn't enforcing rules anymore. She was circling prey, pressing buttons, testing locks, trying to access something she had no right to touch. The structure she relied on to intimidate others had pushed her into a role she didn't understand. She thought she was above scrutiny. In reality, she had made herself the most documented person in Willowbrook. By then, boundaries weren't being crossed. They were being erased. Administrative harassment had become physical intrusion. Authority had turned into abuse. And every layer of her system, from paperwork to patrols to intimidation, was now exposed as a coordinated mechanism designed to break people quietly. That exposure didn't end the conflict. It ensured the next phase would be decided far beyond the HOA's reach. I stopped responding the moment I realized HOA Karen wasn't looking for compliance anymore. She was looking for submission, and submission feeds on reaction. Silence, when used correctly, does the opposite. It forces the other side to keep talking, to keep acting, to keep leaving fingerprints everywhere. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I documented. Every notice, every patrol, every email became part of a record she assumed no one was building. The first call I made wasn't loud or dramatic. I didn't call neighbors or post anything online. I called the county clerk and asked a narrow question about authority. Not what the HOA claimed, not what they implied, what they were legally allowed to certify when it came to private property and government equipment. She pulled the statute, read it once, then read it again. The pause before she answered told me everything. They can't, she said. Not the way this is being done. Not at all. No emotion, no confusion, just certainty. Next came the insurer, not the broker HOA Karen liked to reference, but the underwriter actually named on the policy. I forwarded the violation notices, the supposed safety warnings, and the contractor language she kept leaning on. I didn't explain. I didn't frame it. I let the document speak. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. That audit isn't recognized, the underwriter said. Coverage has never depended on access to that vehicle. Anyone telling you otherwise is wrong. I asked for it in writing. She sent it immediately. That should have ended it. Instead, HOA Karen escalated. Certified letters arrived warning of emergency enforcement. Emails hinted at liens, then condemnation, then vague safety actions that sounded catastrophic without ever citing a statute. Each message carried urgency and nothing else. I saved them all. Every threat that wasn't real made the case stronger. The patrols came back, quieter but more deliberate. The same guards, the same white SUV, headlights off, radios on, standing just close enough to be seen. They didn't knock. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The message was supposed to feel constant. Instead, it became repetitive, predictable, easy to log. The email that broke everything open arrived just after midnight. No greeting, no explanation, just attachments. Someone inside the HOA had finally decided to stop being quiet. Board minutes that were never sent to residents. Vendor contracts stamped confidential. A spreadsheet tracking properties labeled compliant, pending, resistant. My address sat alone in the last column. That wasn't coincidence. That was designation. The financials came next. Revenue projections tied to monitoring fees. Consulting payments routed back through shell companies. Names rotated. Addresses repeated. Amounts small enough to avoid attention. Steady enough to matter. This wasn't sloppy. It was engineered. The last file was a scanned note in HOA Karen's handwriting. Break one publicly. The rest will fall in line. No context. No explanation. Just intent. Written plainly. I stared at it longer than the others. Not angry, not surprised. Certain. I forwarded everything to legal counsel and a county investigator at the same time. I wasn't interested in who would take the lead. I wanted overlap, redundancy, eyes that couldn't all look away. Then I sent one final email to the HOA. Short, neutral. All further contact through counsel. Do not return to the property. HOA Karen responded within minutes. Emergency meeting. Mandatory attendance. Compliance addressed publicly. She thought exposure would intimidate me. She didn't realize she had just scheduled her own collapse. The morning of the emergency meeting arrived without spectacle, which made it worse for her. Systems don't fall apart with shouting. They fail when procedure replaces posturing. I got the call early from the county investigator, short and precise, telling me the sheriff would be present as an observer, not security. Bring everything. Don't engage unless asked. That was it. The decision had already been made somewhere higher than the HOA letterhead. When I walked into the community center, The air felt compressed. Neighbors clustered in small knots, voices low, phones half hidden but ready. No one was sure who this was for, yet, only that something had shifted. Karen stood at the front like she always did, posture rehearsed, smile calibrated to signal control. She glanced at me once, the way someone looks at a problem they believe they've already solved. The gavel came down, and she started immediately, leaning into the language that had always worked for her. Community safety, insurance exposure, non-compliance. She never said my name. She didn't need to. Isolation was part of the script. A few chairs shifted. Someone coughed. She pressed on, momentum her favorite weapon. Then the doors opened, and the sheriff stepped in without announcement. No urgency, no disruption, just presence. Conversations died mid-sentence. The room recalibrated around the badge. HOA Karen didn't stop. She couldn't. She pushed harder, proposing immediate enforcement, framing urgency as responsibility. That was when the sheriff spoke, calm and level, asking a simple question about her authority to make those demands. She blinked, said it wasn't a county matter. He nodded once and said it was now. The county investigator stood and connected a laptop to the projector without ceremony. No speech, no build-up. Emails filled the screen. Vendor contracts, payment logs, revenue projections. The room started to murmur as patterns emerged without explanation. A spreadsheet appeared titled High Liability Properties. Columns labeled compliant, pending, resistant. My address highlighted. Someone gasped. HOA Karen shifted her weight, eyes flicking across the room. The investigator clicked again and brought up the contract with the security compliance firm, signed by the HOA. Fees outlined, consulting payments routed back to board members. Numbers clean enough to look intentional. The insurer's letter came next, stamped and signed. Coverage has never depended on access. Any claim otherwise is false. The room went quiet in a different way. HOA. Karen stood abruptly, saying it was being taken out of context. The investigator clicked again and projected her handwritten note. Break one publicly. The rest will fall in line. Chairs scraped. A hand flew to someone's mouth. The sheriff asked if it was her handwriting. HOA Karen tried to answer, then pivoted, blaming contractors, pressure, misunderstanding. Each word made it worse. Deputies moved in with practiced efficiency. Cuffs closed with a sound louder than the gavel ever was. One board member stood and resigned, then another. Phones came out, but none of them were pointed at me. Every lens tracked her. As she was led past the first row, HOA Karen finally looked directly at me. Not angry, confused, then afraid, like she had just realized she'd misjudged the room, the rules, and the reach of the system she'd challenged. The doors closed behind her, and the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was finality. The room didn't celebrate when HOA Karen disappeared through the side door. It sagged. People stayed seated like standing too fast might draw the wrong kind of attention. Phones lowered. Whispers started and stopped without finishing a thought. What replaced her wasn't relief. It was process. The kind that doesn't ask permission and doesn't need an audience. The county investigator set his phone on the spebble and put it on speaker. The district attorney's voice filled the room, steady and clinical, as if reading inventory instead of lives. Charges were being filed. Insurance fraud, conspiracy, coercion, abuse of authority, obstruction tied to federal property, not possibilities. Filed. An emergency injunction was already active, freezing every HOA enforcement action connected to the fabricated safety directives. Effective immediately. No debate. No window to maneuver. Restitution followed without emphasis. Mid-six figures. Prioritized for homeowners who'd been pressured into paying monitoring fees or threatened with penalties that never had legal footing. Money turned into math, and math turned into scale. People shifted as they realized how many neighbors had been touched by the same quiet fear, how long it had gone on without anyone naming it. The insurer's formal letter was read aloud again, slower this time. Coverage had never depended on access to the Jeep. Any claim otherwise was false. Hearing it publicly rewrote months of intimidation in a single paragraph. The threat that had kept people compliant collapsed into nothing more than a lie, repeated often enough to feel real. A deputy placed a printed county order on the table. Paper against wood. Effective immediately, no HOA could demand firearm audits, access codes, or interior inspections without individual consent or a court order. No loopholes. No interpretations. The boundary was clear because it had to be. The district attorney added one more line for the record, measured and unemotional. Documented training, restraint, escalation avoided. That would be noted. It wasn't praise, it was context. The room reacted anyway, heads turning more carefully now, recalculating what they thought they'd been watching all along. The sheriff glanced at me once, brief and professional, then turned back to the investigator. That was the acknowledgement. Authority didn't linger. It moved on to the next task. Resignations resumed, quieter than before. Papers slid across the table. Voices stayed low. Eye contact was avoided. These weren't statements. They were exits. The board structure folded under the weight of what had been revealed, not because anyone demanded it, but because staying meant inheriting consequences. A county facilities officer stepped forward and removed the red tag enforcement notice from the agenda packet. He tore it cleanly in half and placed it into a folder stamped void. The contractor's permits were revoked. The HOA's security agreement was terminated permanently. Tools that had made intimidation easy were dismantled one by one without ceremony. Nothing else needed to be said. Retaliation didn't look like anger or revenge. It looked like correction. Expertise replaced noise. Documentation replaced threats. Jurisdiction replaced bluster. HOA Karen wasn't relevant anymore. The system had absorbed the damage and was sealing the breach she'd torn open. The meeting didn't adjourn so much as it emptied. People stood when they realized no one was going to tell them what to do next. Chairs scraped softly. Papers were gathered without purpose. Conversations started, stopped, restarted somewhere else. Authority had already left the room, and without it the space felt smaller, heavier, like a set after the actors walk off. What followed wasn't celebration. It was confession, and it came in pieces. A woman near the aisle admitted she'd been paying monthly monitoring fees because she was terrified of losing insurance. Another man said he'd signed paperwork he didn't understand because the letters kept coming faster each time he hesitated. No one raised their voice. No one asked for forgiveness. The admissions stacked quietly, forming a picture no single story could have shown on its own. I stayed where I was, hands flat on the table, letting it unfold without stepping into it. Victory doesn't need a witness if it's real. Attention shifted around me anyway, not the way it had before, not suspicious or hostile, just cautious. People were recalibrating, realizing how much they'd accepted without questioning, and how close that acceptance had come to becoming permanent. A county facilities officer returned to the table with the last piece of paperwork. He removed the red tag notice from the agenda packet, tore it cleanly in half, and placed it into a folder stamped void. The sound of paper tearing landed harder than any speech. The contractor's remaining authority was revoked. The security agreement was terminated. The mechanisms that had made intimidation routine were dismantled in plain sight. The room thinned. Groups formed and dissolved. No one tried to reclaim the microphone. There was nothing left to frame. When I walked outside, the evening air felt open, unwatched. Porch lights along the street clicked on one by one as I headed home. Not in unison, not coordinated, just normal again. A former board member caught up to me near their door, breathless. Apology already rehearsed. He said they hadn't known. I stopped, looked at him once. Not angry, not smug, just finished. That was the point, I said. He nodded like he understood, and stepped back without another word. At the house, I paused with my hand against the frame and listened. The neighborhood settled into itself the way it always had before anyone decided to manage it by fear. The Jeep sat where it had always been. The chain was gone. The vault remained closed. Nothing needed to be opened. Nothing needed to be proven. HOA Karen didn't speak again. No statement, no explanation, no last attempt to control the narrative. She simply vanished from the space she once dominated. And in the quiet that followed, no one tried to replace her.